Good afternoon everybody. Welcome to the history class. We are discussing about the first chapter of unit 4, that is British economic policies in India 1757 to 1857 AD, commercial policy, drain of wealth, development of transport and communication system, and revenue policy. In the previous class we have already discussed about commercial policy, drain of wealth, development of transport and communication system, and today in this class we are going to discuss about the revenue policies. The chief source of income of the Britishers was the collection of revenue. After the Battle of Plassey in 1757, the Britishers they established their administration in India and made India as one of their colony, and their main motive was to loot the wealth of India, and they wanted to profit their home country, so that they introduced new policies in the field of administration, in the field of economy, and also there are several changes in the social system of Indian people. Revenue policy is one of the most important event in the history, as they had changed the economic system of India. India faced poverty due to those faulty policies which was introduced by the Britishers or East India Company. As East India Company was a trading company, it always opted for the benefit of its own country and of itself. For the benefit of East India Company, they introduced the revenue policies like permanent settlement system, mahalwari system and rayatwari system, and in Awadh it introduced a new type of revenue policy, the talukdari system. So, these revenue systems they not only provided huge amount of wealth to the foreigners, but also they helped for the development of industry in England, and there was the development of luxurious life of Europeans, but the people of India they faced poverty and the cottage industry that was destroyed by them. So, in this class we are going to discuss about the revenue policy. Before discussing about the revenue policy, I want to give you some information regarding the development of communication and transport system. I have already discussed about the railway system, the development of roads. Now, in this class I am going to show the development of post and telegraph system. In 1854, a new post office act was passed, a director general was appointed, and his work was to supervise the work of post offices in all the presidencies. A uniform rate of half anna per letter was introduced, and for the first time postage stamp was they were issued in India. The people they communicated with each other very easily by using the postal system, and post offices became a source of revenue collection for the Britishers, and the East India Company also got benefited by introducing the postal system. Although they had introduced the postal system for their benefit, for their convenience, yet the Indians they also got benefited, and they developed nationalism by establishing communication among themselves, and they established their relationship with each other in different parts of the country during that period. Then the first telegraph line in India was opened during the period of Lord Dalhousie. In 1854, Lord Dalhousie he introduced several reforms for the development of social life of India, and Dalhousie was appointed as a British engineer named O. Sangnesi as telegraph superintendent, and entrusted him with the task of introducing telegraph lines in India. Due to his activities or due to the help of Sangnesi, about 4,000 miles of telegraph lines were constructed in India, and the people of India, they also got benefited by using the telegraph system. There was the several revolutionaries, in future they also got benefited by using those telegraph system, as there was no modern convenience, no modern communication system was convenient during that period. So, the telegraph system which was introduced by Dalhousie helped a lot for the development of nationalism as well as for the easy communication of the national fighters. So, the first telegraph line from Calcutta to Agra was opened in 1854, covering a distance of 800 miles. By 1857, it was extended to Lahore and Peshawar, and the revolutionaries, they had destroyed 1,000 miles of telegraph system. So, in Burma, a line was laid down from Rangoon to Mandalay. So, telegraph system and postal system, that helped a lot for the better communication system, for the development of India, and for the benefit of the English East India Company as well as for the benefit of the Indian people. Then we will discuss about the revenue policy. In 1772, Warren Hastings, he came to India, and he came with specific instructions from the directors that the company was to stand forth as the Diwan. He was instructed to introduce such policy that the company should be benefited. It should have the financial power, it should have the control over the resources, natural resources, over the different economic resources, so that the industry of English East India Company should be benefited and the economic development of England should be possible. So, the company always it wanted to develop more and more economy by imposing different types of taxes and by introducing different new policies in the field of economy. He changed the land tenure from annual to quinquennial. Then the supervisors were appointed as collectors. The districts were organized into 6 divisions. A revenue council was established in every division, and Indian officer Rai Ryan and an auditor general, they were also appointed. So, his main motive was to collect revenues from different sources. Revenue collection, that was the chief source of the economy of the English East India Company, that helped a lot for the development of India and as well as for the development of the home country, that is England, during the 1772. The 5-year settlement with the landlords was, however, converted into annual settlement. So, first of all, he introduced the quinquennial period of he introduced the policy for 5 years, then it was again converted to annual settlement. So, he converted annual settlement in 1778 because of the instructions of the directors of the company. So, the company gave the land to the highest bidders for a fixed period, who in turn extracted as much as he could from the cultivators to increase his margin of profit. As the company gave the highest bidders for the period of 1 year, those jamindars, they wanted to be benefited in that year. So, they did not concentrate on the economic development of the people, of the peasants. They oppressed the people, and they always tried to accumulate more and more wealth during that 1 year. The next Governor General, Lord Cornwallis, he introduced a decennial settlement, and it was made permanent settlement in 1793. When Lord Cornwallis he came to India, he wanted to introduce one type of class which would be loyal to the British East India Company, as well as that will become permanent in nature, as he belongs to the Jamindar family. He wanted to introduce such a type of class who will be the Jamindars and they will be permanent in nature. In India, there was no permanent Jamindars during that period. So, he wanted to create such a type of Jamindars who will be permanent in nature. What is the difference between the English Jamindars and the Indian Jamindars? The British Jamindars, they were permanent in nature, and they had not to give any share to the government or any other persons. But in India, the Jamindars, they had to give the share, as the land was owned by the English East India Company. So, the British government adopted various forms of land tenure in India. It introduced 3 types of land tenures in India. That is permanent settlement, that is the Jamindari, and Mahalwari, and another is the Rayatwari. In Jamindari or permanent settlement system, the Jamindars, they owned land for a permanent period, and they had the ownership of the property, and they can sell the property, they can use according to their own will. Whereas, in the Mahalwari system, the settlement was done with the Mahal or the group of the village people, and in Rayatwari settlement, the settlement was done with the peasants. So, there was a direct contact between the British government and the peasants. So, there are different types of settlement system introduced by the English East India Company in order to collect revenue and to benefit the English East India Company as well as the home government. Lord Cornwallis, he came to India as the Governor General in 1787, and he got the cooperation of the President of the Board of Revenue, Sir John Shore, and Sir James Grant. When he wanted to discuss about the introduction of permanent Jamindari system or permanent settlement system, there was a discussion with Sir John Shore and Sir James Grant. James Grant, he did not agree with Lord Cornwallis, and he wanted that the company should possess ownership of the land. The ownership of land should not be given to the Indian Jamindars. Whereas, Sir John Shore, he suggested to make the landlords the masters of their land by making 10-year settlement. He was not in favor of giving the lands permanently to the Jamindars. He was in view that the land should be given for 10 years tenure. Then Cornwallis, he accepted the suggestions of Sir John Shore and made a 10-year settlement with the landlords. Then in 1790, which was declared permanent on 22nd March 1793. So, the permanent settlement system was introduced in India in 1793 AD. It was introduced in East India, in Bengal, Bihar, Odisha. Especially in these areas, the Jamindari system was prevalent during that period, and Varanasi division of UP and northern Karnataka, which roughly covered 19% of the total British occupied territory or English East India Company's ruling area. Then what were the principles of permanent settlement system? What are the features of permanent settlement system? The Indian Jamindars, who became very loyal to the Britishers, they got benefited by the permanent settlement system. A loyal class or who worked as one of the most powerful supporter of the Britishers, that was proved during the period of 1857, when there was a a struggle or the revolt who took place in India, and the landlords, they became the owners of their land on hereditary basis according to the permanent settlement system. The zamindars, they became the owners of their property. They were given the right to transfer or sell their lands. Now, they are the sole proprietor of their land. So, the revenue that was fixed was twice the previous amount as it was fixed for all time to come. The zamindars, when they were instructed that they had to give a fixed amount of payment to the English East India Company, the amount was fixed during that period. So, the fixed amount was raised twice the number that was given by the zamindars to the English East India Company, because during the period of natural calamity or during the a period when there was more production of agricultural products, but the same amount should be given by the zamindars. So, that was the fixed rate. So, the Britishers, they got benefited because during the period of natural calamities, the Indian zamindars, they had to pay a less amount of rupees or a tax or revenue collected during that period, but due to the fixation of the amount, now the British East India Company, they got benefited. Then the tenants, they got patta, describing therein the area of the land and the rent to be collected for that land. So, the landlord also fixed the revenue with the peasants. Now, the peasants, they had to give revenue to the landlord. The landlord fixed the amount or fixed the amount which should be collected from the peasants. So, the peasants, very often we can see that in ancient past, the peasants, when they failed to deposit the fixed amount, they had to lose their property, their house and their domestic animals, etc. They faced poverty due to this permanent settlement system. So, the company would not deprive the landlords of their ownership as long as they paid the fixed amount of revenue. The landlords, they got the power or the proprietorship of their land, and they were also instructed to pay their revenue in time. They were the revenue collectors. Then the sunset law, it was introduced by the English East India Company, because if any landlord, he failed to deposit the fixed amount in the due period or in the fixed day before sunset, then he had to lose his zamindari and he had to lose his status. So, due to this sunset law, many zamindars, they lost their territory, they lost their zamindari and they became paupers, or they led the life of poverty. So, the landlords had to deposit the land revenue in the company's treasury by the sunset of the fixed day. So, if they failed to pay the amount on that day, they were deprived of their zamindari by the application of the sunset law. So, the sunset law deprived many zamindars to be the ownership of their land. Then we will discuss about the merits of permanent land settlement system or the zamindari system. The security in the collection of revenue. This is the first point, security in the collection of revenue. As the revenue amount was fixed, so the British government, he had not to spend much more in calculating or in the assessment of the revenue each year, whether it is the time of natural calamity or any period then he had to, the British English East India Company had to collect the same amount, and the Jamindars, they had to submit the fixed amount in a particular date. So, there was no problem in the collection of revenue, land revenue during the period of natural calamities, whether it is flood or famine, etc. Then economic prosperity of the company. The company also got benefited due to the fixed amount of revenue which was collected by the British occupier, or the Britishers, they appointed the Jamindars. They collected the revenues and deposited before the East India Company's officials. Then it is a timely step. Some historians say that the introduction of a new revenue policy was a timely step, as there was the period of anarchy, that there was the period of the revolutions. Then the British government, they appointed a loyal class of Jamindars who collected the revenues for the British government and deposited the same in a fixed date, and that solved many other problems of the Britishers, the English East India Company's officials. During that period, when the English East India Company assessed the amount of revenue which would be collected from the people of India, they were engaged in different other departments, and they worked for the development of their East India Company and for the better administrative system, and they employed the Jamindars to do this work of revenue collection. So, it was a timely step, because during that period there was a period during which period the British officers, English East India officials, they engaged themselves in other works. Then there was a creation of loyal landlord group. The English East India Company, as it introduced a new revenue policy, that is the Jamindari or permanent settlement system, a landlord group was created during that period. The landlords, they showed their loyalty to the British officials. They never thought to revolt against the English East India Company, and as they belonged to the affluent class, they were living a luxurious life, and they also got benefited, as they had to pay 10/11th part to the British East India Company, and they had to remain 1/11th part with them. So, they never revolted against the British officials. 89% of the revenue which they collected during that period, that was deposited in the office of the English East India Company, and they got other benefits. So, then the growth of agriculture and trade. As the Jamindars, they got the permanent land or they got the land permanently, they wanted to develop agriculture and they wanted to develop trade system. There is the agricultural production. So, the Jamindars, now they wanted to create more agricultural fields, and they wanted to achieve more and more agricultural production, so that they can be benefited. And there was the development of trade due to more agricultural products. So, India got benefited, and the Jamindari class, they also got benefited due to the introduction of permanent settlement system. Then we will discuss about the demerits of permanent land settlement system. Misery of the cultivators. The peasant section, they were oppressed class of India during that period. As the Jamindars, they exploited the Indian peasants because they levied heavy taxes on the peasants of India, and they were unable to pay those revenue because they had no other source of income. They should provide them as tax revenue to the British officials or to the zamindars. And the zamindars, they also imposed heavy taxes which was not possible for the peasants to be paid. So, the peasants, they were in the grip of the money lenders. They had to borrow the money from the money lenders in order to pay the revenue. Then the ruin of old zamindars and rise of new landlordism. In past, the old zamindars, they always look after their peasants and they always took care of their subjects or the peasants who were working in their field. They had emotional attachment with the people of our India, or they had the fellow feeling activities which we can see with the old zamindars. But the new landlordism started during the British ruling period, English East India Company's ruling period. A new class of zamindars who were created by the introduction of permanent settlement system. They believed in luxurious life and they lived in towns. They had no relation with the peasants, and there was the development of intermediaries. They appointed the people who collected revenue for them and they remained at cities. They did not care about the peasants who were working in the fields, in their fields. So, they had no emotional attachment with the peasants who were working in their field. So, this new landlordism that not only created an intermediaries who exploited the peasants and benefited themselves and benefited the peasants, that is the demerit of new permanent land settlement system. Then the company's loss. The company, although it fixed a rate to be collected by the zamindar as a revenue, it faced a loss because the zamindars, they improved the agricultural land, they used new technologies and new scientific measures were applied for the more and more production in the agricultural fields, but they had to give a particular amount of revenue. So, the company, it lost, the financial loss was possible for the company. Then R.C. Datta, he described it as a timely step. Ramesh Chandra Datta was one of the great economists of India. He found that the introduction of permanent settlement as a timely step, but Holmes called it an unfortunate step. It is vehemently criticized by Metcalfe, Colebrook, Mill and Powell. Although permanent land settlement system, it established a new revenue policy, it established a very sound financial system during that period, and it benefited the zamindars, the peasants, they also got patta and they had their own land they should cultivate, but still then they were oppressed by the zamindars as heavy taxes were imposed upon them and they were unable to pay those taxes or revenues to the zamindar, and they had to borrow money from the money lenders or sahukar from the villages, and they lost their own home, their land, their everything. That was a period in which we can see the development and also the destruction of financial condition of different Indians during that period, Indian people during that period. In South and Southwest India, there are no zamindars with large estates. I am talking about the Rayatwari settlement. When the British officials, they wanted to introduce another type of settlement or a new revenue policy, which is different from the permanent land settlement system, that was the Rayatwari settlement. When the government failed to accumulate more and more wealth from permanent land settlement system, it wanted to introduce a new revenue policy, that is Rayatwari settlement. As in permanent land settlement system, there is no connection with the peasants, direct connection with the peasants, but in a Rayatwari settlement there is a direct relation of peasant and the government and English East India Company. So, as the direct relationship was established between the English East India Company and the peasants, the government knew about the condition of the peasants and it wanted to save the peasants from the oppression of the zamindars or oppression of the higher class societies. So, that Rayatwari settlement was introduced in India, but it failed due to several reasons, due to faulty assessment of the revenue which should be collected from the peasants. That was one cause, because the intermediaries, they calculated wrongly and imposed heavy taxes on the peasants of India, so that the peasants, they suffered a lot and it also failed. This revenue policy also failed. So, in South and Southwest India, there were no zamindars with large estates with whom the settlement could be made by the English East India Company. It was first introduced in Baramahal district by Reed and Munro. In 1820, this system was introduced in Madras, Bombay, Berar, East Punjab, Assam and some areas of Coorg. So, here the English East India Company, it wanted to ameliorate the condition of the peasant, so that this new Rayatwari settlement system was introduced in this area. They had seen the oppression, the exploitation of the peasants in the hand of the zamindars who were holding the lands permanently, and they did nothing for the development of the peasants. When the Britishers, they wanted to develop the economical condition of the peasants, they wanted to introduce the Rayatwari settlement. What are the principles of Rayatwari settlement? Every registered holder of land was recognized as the proprietor of land and was held responsible for direct payment of land revenue to the state. When permanent land settlement system was introduced, the zamindar, he collected the land revenue from the people and from the peasant, and he deposited that amount in a fixed day before the sunset. But in Rayatwari settlement, the land revenue was directly deposited by the peasant. So, every registered holder or every peasant, he was recognized as the proprietor of land. Land ownership was given to the peasants, and they were also held responsible for the payment of the revenue to the state. Here the direct contact between the state and the peasant was established in Rayatwari settlement. Then he had the right to sublet his land holdings, to transfer, to mortgage or to sell that land. The peasant now had the right, he had the right, if he will face any difficulty in his life, then he can sell his land to anybody. But before the introduction of Rayatwari settlement, he had no right to sell or mortgage the land. Then the peasant, he was not evicted from his holdings by the government so long as he paid the state demand of land revenue. So, the state has fixed an amount so that he can pay that amount to the government or to the state. But if he will fail to submit or deposit the fixed amount or fixed revenue to the state, then he will be deprived of his land. He had no ownership over his land. So, he was not evicted from his holdings by the government so long as he is paying the revenue to the government, to the state. The state demand was mostly kept at 55% of the produce. So, the state demand was 55% of the, then he had to give 55% of the demand and he had to keep the rest with him. He had to keep the rest of product with him. The main features of Rayatwari settlement. What are the main features of Rayatwari settlement? In Rayatwari settlement, assessment upon individual cultivators was made for the first time by the English East India Company. The English East India Company, he assessed the land, the agricultural products, and he imposed the revenue that should be paid by the peasant. Then measurement of field and an estimate of produce. The field was measured and an estimate of agricultural production was made by the officials or by the agents who were employed by the English East India Company. The agents, they found they had made a faulty assessment and heavy taxes were imposed upon the peasants. Due to that, they were unable to pay the fixed amount to the state. Another point is the fixing of government demand of 55% of the produce. The government demanded 55% of the produce. The peasant, he had to submit or he had to deposit 55% of his agricultural production as revenue. But in permanent land settlement system, the zamindars, they imposed heavy taxes upon the peasants because the East India Company had imposed heavy revenue or heavy amount of revenue to be paid by the zamindar, and the zamindar was unable to pay it. So, he had to impose more and more taxes upon the peasants. He exploited the peasant in order to benefit the English East India Company. But in this Rayatwari settlement system, the peasant, he had to deposit 55% of his agricultural product and the rest was with him, so that he got benefited. Then what are the merits of Rayatwari settlement? A direct contact was established between the company and cultivators. When the English East India Company introduced new revenue policies, it always opted for the benefit of the company. When it taxed or it imposed revenue or imposed taxes upon the peasants directly, it got benefited, because the peasants, they had to deposit more and more amount of revenue. As the peasants, they got the patta of their land, they always seek to grow more and more crops, and they applied new technologies so that they can got benefited by the more products, agricultural production. So, the company's share increased because there was the extension of agriculture. Due to the extension of agricultural land and much more production of agricultural products, the company got benefited and the peasants, they also got benefited. Then the ryots, they showed keen interest for the development of land and agriculture. As now the ryots, by the Rayatwari settlement, they got benefited because they were the owners of their land. They can mortgage, they can sell, they can use their land as their will. There is nobody will force them and nobody will take away their agricultural product. So, when they got the proprietorship or land proprietorship and they became the owner of their land, they tried to develop their agriculture. They tried to develop their land. They wanted more agricultural production, so that they got benefited and the British government or English East India Company also got benefited due to the Rayatwari settlement. The company was lenient regarding collection of revenues during natural calamities. This is one of the most important point. Here we can see that during the period of natural calamities, during the period of famine, during the period of different type of natural calamities, flood, famine, etc., the peasants, they were forced to pay revenues by the jamindars, local jamindars. But in Rayatwari settlement, the peasants, they were not forced to pay the said amount, as there was the less production due to the natural calamities. The British East India Company officials, they consider about the peasants, because in jamindari system, the jamindar never cared for the natural calamities. He had to collect the fixed amount, but in Rayatwari settlement, due to natural calamities, they were not forced to pay the fixed amount or the said 55% agricultural production which is demanded by the state. So, there is a leniency in the collection of revenue in the Rayatwari settlement. Then the demerits of Rayatwari settlement. The company collected more and more revenue from the ryots. Here, this is the demerit of Rayatwari settlement. The English East India Company, initially it imposed the fixed amount to be collected as revenue from the peasants, but afterwards they demanded more and more revenues from the peasants, when they knew that the ryots, they are converting those lands which are not cultivated before, but they had converted those lands into agricultural fields and they are producing more and more. So, they imposed heavy revenues upon the cultivators. So, afterwards they had the English East India Company imposed heavy revenue, heavy taxes upon the people or the ryots, and the ryots, they were unable to pay the said amount in a fixed period, the fixed amount which was imposed by the British officials. Then they had to borrow the money from the money lenders and sahukars. So, they had to face poverty. The peasants who were living very very good life during the past, now they had to face problems, they had to face financial problems due to the heavy imposition of revenues which was collected from them. Then the ryots did not pay attention for the development of agriculture, as they were imposed heavy taxes, they had to face problems. So, they did not now want to produce more and more agriculture. So, the ryots, they were against the English East India Company due to the faulty assessment of their land. The agents, the intermediaries, they assessed the land in a faulty manner, and heavy revenue was imposed upon the peasants. So, there was constant increase in the land revenue demand. The state in the initial period, which was demanding 55% of the agricultural product, now increased its demand more and more. After 1855, the assessment was fixed at the discretion of the revenue officers at each recurring settlements. So, the Rayat had no fixity of rental, no security against enhancement of rent, and no adequate motive for spending labor and money. This is one of the demerit of Rayatwari settlement. After 1855, the assessment was fixed at the discretion of the revenue officers. So, the revenue officers, they played a vital role during this period, and due to the faulty assessment of the land, they were exploited. Rayatwari settlement was introduced in order to provide justice to the peasants, to ameliorate the condition of the peasants, to enhance their financial condition, and this should be free from the oppression of the zamindars. But Rayatwari settlement became the cause of their sorrow, their poverty. Then we will discuss about the Mahalwari settlement. Under the Mahalwari system, the unit for revenue settlement was the village or mahal, that is the estate. Now, the English East India Company, it introduced a new revenue policy, that was the Mahalwari system or Mahalwari settlement. In the Mahalwari settlement, they had the settlement with the village as a whole, and the village was responsible for the payment of revenue. Although the peasants, they were personally responsible for the deposit of revenue, yet they had to pay the revenue in a village or in a group. The village land belonged jointly to the village community. Technically, the body of co-heirs who were jointly responsible for the payment of land revenue, though individual responsibility was also there. Although the peasants, they paid the revenues, they had individual responsibility. The fixed amount of revenue was to be paid by the village head, but the responsibility, the personal responsibility of the peasant was there. The Mahalwari tenure was introduced in major portion of the UP, the central provinces, the Punjab with variations, and covered 30% of the area. The Mahalwari settlement, it was introduced in major portion of the Uttar Pradesh, the central provinces. In this area, the people, they paid the revenues by forming mahals or village groups, and 30% of the area was under the Mahalwari system or Mahalwari settlement system. Here the government, it established its relationship with the villages or with the group of people of the villages in UP, in Punjab, and in central provinces. So, it was introduced on the recommendation of the Holt Mackenzie. Holt Mackenzie recommended for the introduction of Mahalwari settlement in these areas. It was introduced by the regulation of 1822. So, it was a two-fold settlement. First is the ownership and occupancy right was reserved for the individual peasants, and cultivation was to be done individually. So, the ownership and occupancy right was reserved for the individual peasants, and cultivation was to be done individually, and the peasants were jointly responsible for paying the land revenue to the state. The village as a whole, through its headman or lumbardar, was required to pay the revenue. The Mahalwari system was first adopted in Agra and Awadh. It was carried forward under the supervision of Martins Bard, also called the father of land settlements in North India, and the state share was fixed at 2/3 of the gross produce. The peasants, they had to provide 2/3 of their gross produce as revenue to the English East India Company. So, later it was reduced to 66%. In some areas, it was reduced to 50%. William Bentinck, due to his he interfered and he reduced the amount to 66%. But before that, the peasant had to give the 2/3 of the gross produce, which was a very heavy amount to be paid by the peasant. In some areas, it was 50%. So, Mahalwari was introduced in 1833 during the period of Lord William Bentinck. Then Talukdari system in the district of Awadh. After annexation of Awadh, the first British revenue settlement known as summary settlement of 1856 was based on the assumption. So, another revenue system, that is the Talukdari system, which was introduced in Awadh, because Mahalwari system was not reached in that area. So, government introduced a new type of revenue system, that is Talukdari system at Awadh, and after the annexation of Awadh, the first British revenue settlement, which was known as summary settlement of 1856, was based on the assumption. So, this is all about the revenue policies. So, in this class we have discussed about the decline of cottage industries, how the English East India Company was responsible for the decline of cottage industries in India, and there was the commercialization of agriculture. The food grains were exported to England. England took away the wealth of India in the form of raw materials and flooded Indian markets with the agricultural with the industrial products. A commercialization of agriculture, then decline of cottage industries was due to the British rule or English East India rule, and the poverty, the famine which was faced by the Indian people led them very problem, they led them in problem due to the English East India rule. So, English East India Company, although it developed our society, economy, etc., but it had it was the reason for the drain of wealth. It is the English East India rule is the cause of India's poverty. So, in the next class we will discuss about the revolt of 1857, and in this class we have already discussed the chapter 1 of 4th unit. Okay. So, thank you very much. Thank you.